Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to try to get to the bottom of, those huge differences in how societies developed around the world,
Yeah.
which, ultimately led to like all those inequalities we see today.
Yeah.
So our main source for this deep dive is Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel.
Oh, yeah. Fantastic book.
And it all starts with this really thought-provoking question that a New Guinean politician named Yali asked Diamond.
Okay.
He was like, why you white men have so much cargo and we New Guineans have so little?
It's a really simple question on the surface, right?
Yeah.
But it gets right to the heart of, those global disparities in wealth and technology and power that we see.
For sure.
And Diamond tackles it head on by starting with this dramatic event that really highlights those inequalities in a stark way.
Okay.
The clash between the Inca Emperor Atahualpa and the Spanish conquistador Francisco Pizarro at Cajamarca in 1532.
Oh, yeah. I remember that from the book.
Yeah.
Pizarro and his, what was it, 168 soldiers or something?
Yeah. Yeah, something like that.
With their steel swords and armor and guns and horses.
Right.
Completely just roll over Atahualpa's massive army of 80,000.
Yeah, it's a crazy example of how technology can just completely change history.
Brutal.
And what makes this encounter even more interesting is we actually have accounts from both sides.
Really?
Yeah, so one of Pizarro's companions, Captain Cristobal de Mena, he left this super detailed account
Wow.
that gives us this glimpse into the Spaniards' perspective, their motivations, their justifications for what they did.
It's got to be tough reading something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's essential to remember that, history is often written by the victors.
Right, for sure.
So you always have to take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, it definitely makes you question everything you thought you knew about, that whole period of conquest and colonization.
For sure.
So from this one event, Diamond kind of zooms out to look at the broader pattern of European colonialism.
Right.
And he identifies what he calls proximate factors.
Yeah.
Like those immediate advantages that allowed Europeans to dominate.
Exactly. And it's interesting because these factors aren't just historic curiosities, right?
Okay.
They have echoes in the world even today.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah. So he points to military technology as a key factor.
Right.
Well, even today, access to advanced weaponry continues to shape the balance of power globally.
That's true.
And then there's the devastating impact of infectious diseases.
Right, like smallpox just wiping out huge portions of the Native American population.
It's a chilling reminder that sometimes the biggest battles are fought on a microscopic level.
No kidding.
And, even something like maritime technology that played such a huge role in European expansion.
Right.
Well, today, control of shipping lanes and access to, those advanced transportation systems are still crucial for economic and geopolitical dominance.
Yeah, it's all connected.
Yeah, so we've got these proximate factors, guns, germs, and steel.
Catchy title.
Right. But the even bigger question is, what led to those advantages in the first place?
Yeah, it can't just be a coincidence.
To answer this, Diamond takes us way back to the development of agriculture.
Okay.
And this is where things get really fascinating.
All right, I'm intrigued.
He argues that the availability of domesticable plants and animals played a huge role in shaping which societies got a head start.
So it's not just about human ingenuity or effort.
Not entirely, no.
It's about the environment you're born into.
Exactly. He makes this really compelling argument by comparing regions like the Fertile Crescent,
Okay.
which had an abundance of easily domesticable plants and animals, with places like New Guinea or the eastern United States where those resources were more limited.
So people in New Guinea weren't less intelligent or capable?
Not at all.
They just didn't have the same raw materials to work with.
Precisely. And he emphasizes this by pointing out that the adoption of even just one productive crop,
Right.
well, like the sweet potato in New Guinea, for example,
Okay.
could spark significant societal changes, showing that innovation wasn't limited to specific regions.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's like the environment set the stage for certain societies to develop agriculture earlier, and then that had this cascading effect on everything else.
It's almost like those early farmers weren't just growing crops, they were growing civilization.
That's a great way to put it, but, this shift to more complex societies also brought new challenges.
Like what?
Well, the transition from egalitarian bands to these hierarchical states
Okay.
often involved the rise of what Diamond calls kleptocracy.
Ah, yes, the age-old problem of the powerful exploiting the less powerful.
Right, and he gives several examples of how they maintain that power.
Okay.
Disarming the populace, redistributing just enough wealth to prevent, widespread rebellion,
Smart.
and creating ideologies or religions that justify their rule.
So religion becomes a tool for social control, not just personal faith.
It can be a complex and often uncomfortable aspect of history, but understanding this interplay between power, religion, and social structure is essential to understanding how those early states maintained their grip.
Right, and this is where those early advantages in agriculture and technology really start to have an impact.
Exactly.
Because states with more resources, better organization, and superior technology would have a huge advantage in conquering their neighbors.
Precisely so. We're starting to see how Yali's question about that disparity in cargo has roots that go back thousands of years to
Wow.
the very beginnings of agriculture and the rise of complex societies.
This is all so fascinating, but I know the story doesn't end there.
You're right.
The Fertile Crescent, despite its early lead, eventually lost its dominance.
Exactly. And in the next part, we'll explore why that happened and how other regions like Europe rose to prominence on the global stage.
So we left off with the Fertile Crescent having this big head start in development.
Right.
But obviously you didn't stay on top forever. So what happened?
Well, Diamond argues that their decline was actually linked to their environment.
Okay, remind me about that.
Well, remember all those domesticable plants and animals they had?
Yeah, it seemed like a perfect setup for success.
And it was initial, but that same environment was actually quite fragile.
I see.
So intensive agriculture, deforestation, overgrazing, all that took its toll on the land.
So almost like they kind of loved it to death.
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
wow.
So you have soil erosion, salinization, desertification setting in.
Oh, that's no good.
And that severely hampered their ability to sustain those growing populations.
Right, they kind of undermine their own success.
Yeah, it's a cautionary tale for sure.
Yeah, about the importance of sustainable practices, even for like the most advanced civilizations.
Absolutely.
It makes you think about our own relationship with the environment today.
For sure. But getting back to the Fertile Crescent,
Okay.
as it declined, the center of power kind of shifted westward.
Okay.
First to the Greeks, then the Romans, and eventually to Western and Northern Europe.
Okay. Which brings us to China.
Right.
They had a massive head start too.
Exactly.
Early agriculture, a diverse environment, a huge population.
Yeah, Diamond even talked about those incredible treasure fleets they had sailing around.
Oh yeah, I remember those.
In the 15th century,
Okay.
these fleets commanded by this eunuch Admiral Zhang, he were sailing all the way to the east coast of Africa,
Wow.
decades before any European explorers got there.
Hmm.
And these were massive ships carrying crazy amounts of riches and showcasing, the technological prowess of the Ming dynasty.
But if they were that advanced, why didn't they go on to colonize the world?
Right, why not conquer Europe?
Yeah, exactly.
It's the million-dollar question, and Diamond has a really interesting explanation.
Okay, let's hear it.
He points to the structure of Chinese society,
Okay.
and surprisingly, their geography.
Okay, I'm listening.
So while Europe was divided into all these competing states, China tended towards unification under a single emperor.
So you're saying that their political unity, which you'd think would be a strength,
Yeah,
actually held them back.
in a way, yes.
How so?
Well, a single ruler had the power to make decisions that affected the entire empire.
Makes sense.
And sometimes those decisions, whether well-intentioned or not, had unintended consequences.
Okay, so for example.
Well, Diamond uses those treasure fleets as an example.
Okay.
They were abruptly stopped because of a power struggle at court.
Seriously. So one guy basically changed the course of history.
Yeah, it really highlights how random chance plays a role in history.
Yeah, those what-if questions.
Exactly.
What if those fleets had continued? Would the world be different today?
It's tempting to speculate, but Diamond's point is that China's unity, while it had its advantages,
Okay.
ultimately limited its ability to adapt and innovate in the long run.
So it's like one emperor could make a decision,
Right.
and it would affect everyone.
Exactly. And because China was so unified,
Right.
it had this huge ripple effect.
Hmm.
The shipyards were dismantled, maritime exploration was abandoned, and China basically turned inward.
And missed its chance to, become a global superpower.
Yeah.
Wow.
Whereas in Europe, all that political fragmentation actually fostered competition.
Okay, so if one king or whatever rejected a new idea,
Right.
someone else might embrace it?
Exactly. And that led to this constant churn of experimentation and progress.
And that gave them the edge.
Yeah, Diamond argues that this constant competition was a huge driver of European innovation.
Okay, in what areas specifically?
Well, especially in things like shipbuilding, navigation, and military technology.
All the things you need to conquer the world, basically.
Exactly.
It's all starting to come together.
And then there's another fascinating comparison Diamond makes
Okay.
between the coastlines of Europe and China.
All right, I'm intrigued.
He points out that Europe's jagged, indented coastline,
Okay,
full of all those peninsulas and islands,
right?
naturally led to the development of independent states.
Because they were all separated?
Exactly, whereas China's smoother coastline and those interconnected river systems made it easier for them to be unified.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's a visual representation of how geography can shape political destinies.
Okay, so to recap, both the Fertile Crescent and China, despite their early advantages,
Right.
faced limitations because of their environments.
Exactly. One was too fragile and the other was almost too unified.
And then Europe, with its fragmented landscape and its spirit of competition and innovation,
Right.
ended up on top.
Yeah, but it's important to remember that Europe's dominance wasn't inevitable,
Of course.
and it definitely wasn't achieved without conflict and exploitation.
Right, there are a lot of dark chapters in that story.
For sure. But what I think is so compelling about Diamond's argument is that he pushes us to think beyond those simple narratives.
Of progress and decline.
Exactly. He shows us that history is way more complicated than that.
Yeah,
It's a tapestry woven from geography, biology, and culture.
I like that analogy.
And one of the key takeaways is that historical accidents
Okay.
and random chances
Okay.
can have a huge impact on how societies develop.
Right, but even with this understanding of the past, the future is still uncertain, right?
Absolutely. And that's where Diamond's work leaves us with some really thought-provoking questions.
Okay, like what with...
Like, can we learn from these historical patterns? Can we avoid repeating the mistakes of the past? Can we use our understanding of history to create a more just and equitable future?
I mean, those are some pretty heavy questions.
Yeah,
Especially when you think about how we're living in a world that's still so shaped by those historical forces that Diamond describes.
it's true those forces have had a huge impact on human history.
Right.
But Diamond's work isn't supposed to be all doom and gloom.
Okay, good.
He's not saying that geography is destiny,
Right.
but that by understanding those patterns,
Yeah.
we can hopefully make better choices about the future.
So it's not about just giving up.
No, not at all.
It's about recognizing those forces and figuring out how to navigate them.
Exactly.
Maybe even challenge them.
Yeah, I think one of the most important takeaways from Guns, Germs, and Steel is that the inequalities we see today,
Yeah.
they aren't the result of one group being superior to another.
Okay.
It's not about race or intelligence or anything like that.
Right.
It's about those environmental differences that gave some societies a head start way back when.
That's a really important point, especially when you consider how those old ideas about racial superiority are still used to justify inequality.
Yeah, it's a reminder that we need to challenge those harmful narratives and look for deeper explanations.
So if those historical forces have played such a big role in shaping the world we live in, what does that mean for us today?
Well, for one thing, it encourages us to be more aware of the deep historical roots of inequality.
Okay.
We can't just focus on present-day issues.
Right.
We need to understand how the legacies of colonialism and environmental disparity are still affecting things.
So it's like we're all playing a game,
Okay.
but some players got a huge head start, not because they deserved it,
Yeah,
but because of the circumstances they were born into thousands of years ago.
that's a great analogy, and it raises some tough questions about fairness and responsibility.
Like, how do we even the playing field when those historical inequalities are so deeply entrenched?
Right? It's not like we can go back in time and redistribute those plants and animals,
Exactly.
but we can work to address those ongoing disparities.
In what way?
Well, we can support economic development, promote education, and tackle those systemic issues that perpetuate inequality globally.
Okay, that makes sense.
And I think on a personal level,
Yeah.
it's about being aware of how our own actions might be contributing to those patterns, even unintentionally.
So like recognizing our own privilege and trying to use it for good.
Exactly. It's about acknowledging that we all have a responsibility to act in a way that doesn't further disadvantage those who are already facing systemic barriers.
This all reminds me of that quote, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it."
Yeah,
But I think Diamond's work goes beyond just remembering.
it's about understanding.
Exactly. And through understanding, hopefully we can make better choices.
Yeah, choices that lead to a more just and equitable future.
That's a powerful message, and it definitely leaves me feeling a sense of both urgency and hope. Urgency because the challenges are huge,
Right.
but hope because Diamond shows us that we're not just passive bystanders.
Exactly. We have the power to learn to adapt and to make choices that shape a better future.
This has been an incredible deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
It's really made me think about the world in a whole new way.
I'm glad to hear that.
And we hope you'll continue to explore these ideas with us and check out Guns, Germs, and Steel for yourself.
Yeah, it's a great read.
So until next time, keep those brains buzzing.